Welcome, everyone, to another episode of IT Visionaries. And today we have the head of security and IT from Postman, Joshua Scott. Josh, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Hey, right out the gate, we've read the news. We know that Postman is an exciting, fast growth company, raised a Series D funding, massive numbers. But for those of our audience that are not familiar with Postman, could you please tell us, what does Postman do? What does it make and what does it do?
Postman's an API platform for doing development. Essentially, we provide a suite of tools to allow developers to make it simple for them to actually develop APIs and collaborate with their peers, and provide a bunch of other tool sets. There's a platform component to it, workspaces. There's quite a bit to the platform itself. So yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
So
good.
Oh yeah. So for those listening and maybe aren't too familiar with Postman, the way I would say is you guys help other software companies turn their products into APIs. Is that accurate?
We enable them to actually create, test, debug, and do a bunch of other functions for their APIs.
Perfect. And we all know that every software service that we have today is API. It does feel API first. We are in a time frame where every enterprise product or application has to be able to connect to someone else's product or application. That seems to be endless. And we have talked to many of our guests in the security space talk about, like, where does the responsibility of cybersecurity begin and end? Because if I'm a company, like let's say, our head sponsor is Salesforce and people are using the Salesforce product, that's our CRM. The reality is that data is being used with many other products, which Postman probably helps build, debug, test their APIs. Talk about the role of security in an API world, because this is not going to change. We're never going back. Every product from here on forward is going to be able to connect with another product. That's what I believe. I mean, I think it's never probably, I think you would agree. It's never going back to where, like, I have an isolated, siloed product. The data stays here. Nothing can talk to it.
Right.
I'd love to kind of hear your experience and what challenges you guys face, given the fact that this is exactly the way we're going to work.
Right. I mean, I don't see it changing at all. I think, APIs are eating the world. Software is eating the world.
Yep.
Every application needs to be able to communicate to another application. You need to be able to integrate it into, basically the fabric of your business, right? So that's, you want Salesforce to talk to your other tool sets so you can enable them to do whatever it needs to do, right? You want to enable, like, from a security standpoint, I want all of my tool sets to be able to talk to my other tool sets, so that essentially my team can create the glue between all of these different tool sets to enable them to do more. Right. No product is, ever 100%, fulfills every need. So you're going to need a bunch of different tool sets to actually kind of pull things together. And that's where the APIs come into play. Where does security end with that? I think that's an interesting question. I mean, basically security is involved at, pretty much every level. And it's an interesting item because, many years ago, security wasn't involved in those types of things. And really APIs were an afterthought. So it's just things are changing quite a bit.
So give us an idea of what your principal concern is, because this is something that I think is really interesting what Postman does. It's helping other companies work, big debug tests. You mentioned, like, for their APIs, security is part of all of their lives. Like, no company's coming to you like, hey, I don't need to worry about security, right? Everyone's got to worry about it. What does this mean? I guess, is it like, we talk about security. We'd love for you to explain maybe more technically, like, what it is you're helping these companies do on a security level to make sure their APIs are secured, so that their, I guess, role in the chain of information is secured. And of course, no one wants to be hacked, but, like, they also have to prove that they have, that they are responsible, keeping up with records, whatever the case may be. I'd love to kind of understand how involved you are in this process.
Yeah. So we're doing quite a bit of work around, how do we secure an API and kind of the flow of that? So things like, discovering, right? Discoverability. You can't secure what you don't know about. So if you don't actually have a catalog of the different types of APIs you have, how do you know what kind of controls to put on it and what needs to be protected? And then, as an API is actually written, as the scheme was defined, as the different types of components are actually defined, are they actually meeting specifications? Do they introduce some type of vulnerability that could be a potential problem? So we've got things that look for low hanging fruit from a static scanning standpoint, essentially. There's other things that we're looking to do. I think we actually do some integration with various other organizations to provide kind of dynamic scanning. So that's another part of the big workflow is, once you have something running from an API standpoint, you also want to test it and make sure that when it's actually running, that it's not introducing vulnerabilities or exposing data that it shouldn't. One of the biggest concerns I've had, for many years, and this goes back to my previous time when I was at my last company, is API development was always something that was actually forgotten about. It was actually something done on the back end to enable some type of front end engineering work or some type of back, something else, right? The API wasn't really thought of as a product, whereas nowadays you see a lot more of API as a product, right? API is kind of the main, the main deliverable that the company's doing. From a security standpoint, since it hasn't been something that's in the forefront, they've always been forgotten about for the most part. So, at one organization I was at, we had this huge monolithic API that had so much, a lot of dangerous calls being made. It flew under the radar. It didn't have enough scanning. I mean, we did a lot of work to actually secure the front end and the middle tiers, but the API was something that really was ignored for a long, long time. And then, come to find out that the API was actually accessible to the internet, to the public. It was down a few layers, and we find out that actually you can create users, you can delete users, you can do quite a few different things. And then we found that the keys were actually being leaked in various places. So it's just one of those things that there wasn't enough attention to these types of items before, and now we're seeing a little bit more attention on that.
Josh, you brought up a great point about how, because when I was in software, I do recall API, you mentioned before, it was like an afterthought, right? You built your core product. Of course, some people wanted some of the information that your product produced. So it's like, okay, I'll make an API and you can get it if you want. It was the principal goal for most software companies in the past to have like users in seat in their interface using their product. It's always kind of been like that, I feel like. But we are entering places where software, it's not clear where people work anymore. It's like they're working in these, Salesforce it is our sponsor, but it is a great example. Like that role principally works inside Salesforce. Other products, platforms, they have people, marketing tools, have people working principally in their products, which has to make all these API calls out. Are you seeing, and there's also another rise of companies that are API first. We've had a couple on our show that are like, basically there is no interface to their business. Like it is an API. Like, I'd argue that Twilio is kind of like that kind of tool, right? Yeah. It's an API product. Are you seeing more of these products come up, API first products where more of the engineering mind share is going there because of just the dynamic of how, I guess the nature of SaaS today, right? Like we said, everything's working interconnected products. The front end may or may not be the principal use case anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely seeing a lot more of that from a security standpoint. I mean, we're definitely seeing it across the rest of the software industry. I think it's, partly because you want to be able to abstract away kind of certain portions of the application. AWS is a really good example right there. I mean, most of what they're doing throughout that entire product is, it's all API driven, right? You do have an interface, but for the most part, I mean, one of the things we did at my last place was we tried to abstract it all away so that we could get our engineers used to working through our, working in our way of doing things, using our tool sets, using our deployment mechanisms. So they didn't have to know the interface of Amazon. They didn't have to get familiar with it. They leveraged our tools and we interfaced through the AWS API, which had basically enough permissions to actually do everything. And that's kind of one of the core principles I do from a security standpoint is that's how I want to integrate all of my tool sets. I don't want my teams to have to learn yet another interface. And walk through it. I want it to provide the value that whatever that tool is for. And so it really depends on what you're doing. I think that's what the big thing about Stripe, right? We're just providing you this API so you can integrate into your platform because we're just providing you this particular service.
Yeah, we're in all the single sign-on companies have done that. Now Stripe's done that, payments processing, and now there's going to be more coming, right? There's going to be so many more. Who knows what people are going to create going forward with API culture? I want to kind of get your idea around the security aspect of it, because when I think about API calls for a product, right, constantly products are calling information in. Constantly other products and services, authenticated tools are going to write information to my product's database potentially, and others are going to ask for data out. So how does the security, so like part of security is making sure that it's only authorized individuals that get this information. When you see so many requests, right? An API sees so many requests, like, you know, I've seen like API limits of like tens of thousands per second of calls. How do you know things are happening? Like what goes into like securing that? Because in one hand, it's got to be open because it's got to enable this many calls to be made. On the other hand, it's got to be secure and it can't let the bad actors in. Give us an idea of what you guys have to think about.
I mean, so you have to think about kind of, you know, how you're doing the authorization, right? Who you're issuing keys to, what type of API is it? Is it, you know, something that's open that the general person can go request an API to, or is it very customer focused where I have a customer, we're going to give them API? That at least gives you some way to kind of narrow the focus on, okay, let me track behavior and usage based on kind of that API key. It's still challenging though, because it's a single endpoint that you're, you know, monitoring, or a single set of endpoints. And, you know, keys can get lost, keys can get stolen. You know, you want to make sure that you maintain those keys, which is also, you know, another challenge, right? How do you distribute them? How do you maintain them? How do you rotate them? There's quite a bit that goes into it. But generally from an API, you know, from a security standpoint, it's an application just like anything else, right? So it's a matter of understanding, you know, what are the data flows within that application? You know, what are the risky kind of, you know, calls that you can actually make to, you know, that would actually have an impact to the organization, and really, you know, monitoring basically your crown jewels. What's that really dangerous endpoint that could, you know, delete all data within a database, or delete certain records? Monitoring those for usage, monitoring those for, you know, for anomalies. So it's, you know, collecting mountains of data, collecting lots of, you know, behavior data, and then really just analyzing it like any other application. You know, there's a different set of risks that are involved, definitely from an API standpoint. But, you know, for the most part, I mean, it is an application just like anything else.
Gotcha. And from your perspective, this is an interesting thing, because a lot of the people we've had on our show talk about how, you know, there's only a handful. There's actually significantly more workloads still not in the cloud, despite the fact that we think we're all ultra modern, like everything's the cloud. I had an Amazon sales rep once tell me that he thinks Amazon told at their SKO that less than 20% of workloads are in the cloud. 80% more to go.
It doesn't surprise me. We started our cloud transformation when at my last place in 2014. Yeah. And when I left there in 2020, it still was not completed. Right. Yeah. So we still had, you know, a data center with, you know, probably 1,000 servers running in it. So yeah, it's hard to transition away, especially when you have a lot of legacy and, you know, just kind of, you know, old applications that are sitting around. These things aren't cloud friendly to begin with.
Yeah. And they were also talking about how a lot of steps, I guess the first step for a lot of these companies is that they have to develop APIs so that the information contained in these legacy systems can, let's just say something real simple, like you wanted to use another cloud's machine learning system to tag information, something as simple as that. Well, how do you get it out? Right. So they're talking about that. Is Postman involved? Do you guys have experience working with these legacy companies with these legacy applications that are trying to get to cloud? Is that part of your role, or do you principally work with mostly like software companies?
I believe it's mostly software companies. So from that standpoint, I mean, we do, you know, actually, sorry, you can actually scratch that. Yeah. I know we work with, you know, pretty much everyone across the board. So whether it's financial services or, you know, I'm sure there's brick and mortars, there's, you know, a number of different customers. I would imagine that a large portion of them are still, you know, data center focused with, you know, with on-prem type instances. I don't really have too much information on that specific portion of it. Mm-hmm. Now, I know from our standpoint, I mean, we're a cloud native company, we're cloud first. So everything we do is, you know, in the cloud. So we have the same type of concerns as, you know, how do we actually, you know, understand what's in the cloud? How do we actually transfer data between these different clouds? Because, you know, we may leverage Salesforce and AWS and various other platforms. And we want to have that tight integration between, you know, each of those endpoints.
Do you see specific industries having a harder time with API security than others?
I mean, I think everybody has generally had a problem with it. So I don't know that anybody's, you know, necessarily better. I think unfortunately, from a security standpoint, everybody's still struggling with security, right? There might be a few, shining examples here and there, like you hear about, Netflix has a really, really good program, and some of the more modern shops are really doing things a little bit differently. But, security is not something that's easily solved. And, the way we've been doing it for all these years really hasn't worked, because we're still seeing tons of issues and tons of breaches, and, it's not letting up.
So how do you plan on kind of addressing that? Because, like, to your point, the way security has always been thought of, the bad actors are, they are who they are. They try to stay one step ahead of what you guys are up to. How do you see, what do you think needs to happen? We've heard a lot from people talk in this subject, from culturally things have to change, from financial incentive has to change, the technical. They said it was harder to change. This is like, it could be, some of our guests have said that if the culture changes and the financial incentives change, then the technology and the products and services people will come up with will change too, which does that equal better security? I'd love to hear your perspective on how do you keep up?
It's hard to keep up. I think the tech side of it is actually somewhat easier. I think it's really, it's all about the kind of changing behavior. So changing culture, changing behavior, really getting people to think about kind of, including security early on within the cycle. And also, it is a financial thing, right? So understanding kind of, what is the impact? It's not just financial, but what is the impact from a risk standpoint? So really kind of diving into those two areas. If you can, kind of, break it down to, how does it affect the financials or the risk and the reputation? And then how do you actually change behavior? Those are the two areas that, you really kind of focus on, because the tech is always going to change, right? 2 years from now, there's going to be, the next latest and greatest within tech, right? Whether it's, still developing on Node.js or some new kind of front end technology, whatever it happens to be, we're always going to see continuous change. It's something I tell my teams all the time too, is the only constant we have is change. So let's just continue to, let's plan for that, right? We know tech will change, but if we put in good patterns and good practices and really kind of, enable the teams to make better decisions, we're going to have much more success. But it's definitely a tough problem. So one of the other things we do too is, how do we actually, find signal, through all the noise, right? So it's about identifying what's valuable to the organization. What are the most critical assets, the most critical components of those assets, and then focusing your attention on those. Let's identify the risks and the threats that are applicable and actually, tackle those, because then at least we know if something catastrophic were to hit, at least we've protected the things that are most valuable.
So one of the things that we talk about with a lot of our guests is the fact that the speed of business is the currency. Like that's one of the big inherent problems about being secure, is that the business doesn't really want to give you time to do that. Even if money wasn't, we've had guests say, like, even money wasn't the issue, time is, because no one wants to wait and no one wants to hear, hey, Josh, we want to ship this new feature of Postman. It's like, well, I need 6 months to figure out if it's secure. Like, nobody wants to hear that.
That's never going to fly. Yeah. I mean, we can't slow down the business from a security standpoint. We really got to start thinking about it from a different lens, right? It's not about slowing the business and putting in these gates that actually make it more difficult, because the business has to continue to, operate and continue to do what it does. If security is getting in the way, then we're doing it wrong.
Yeah. So how do you go about, like, tell me about like a dream, if it has to be a dream scenario, go ahead and tell me like your dream scenario. What do you think is essential to building the culture, the team process to make a very security centric organization that can plug most of the holes, but is mindful of time, because time is the constraint. I feel like no CEO is going to listen to their head of IT and be like, oh,
right,
you need more time. Oh, cool. Right. They'll always want to know, well, how much more time, right? Time is the constraint. So how do you build around that given that?
I mean, there's a number of different ways, right? One of them is, more decentralization of kind of the security operational components, right? A lot of times we're not in the best position to make certain types of decisions. So, it could be the engineering teams who are actually at the front line writing the code, or it could be, the finance team who's actually approving these types of, transactions, right? So it's about getting them the necessary information, making sure that they understand how to respond in certain types of scenarios, and enabling them to do their job in a secure manner. Right? How do we put guardrails around kind of their typical day-to-day workflows, right? If you're an engineer developing code, how do we, make it fail fast, so that if you actually do make, you put in a poor security configuration, that it'll tell you immediately, oh, this is a security issue. You probably don't want to do this, right? No different than as you're writing code, if there's a syntax error, it it won't even work, right? So how do we get security involved at that point? Fail them fast so that they can actually fix it and have it be, secure by design, essentially. Also, how do we actually put in, secure defaults? Make sure that the system is built securely from the start, so that whatever they put in, it's you're not going to actually expose things too much. Another kind of ideal scenario is how do you compartmentalize things more, segment things more, right? So that that the blast radius is reduced. If there is an issue with this particular segment, this business unit, this application, this component, that it can only do so much damage because you've limited essentially the blast radius. I think that's really going to be kind of how it's going to be solved, because there's just too many moving pieces. There's too much change going on. And if we're trying to do 100% security, which is not possible, obviously, but if we're trying to secure every single component and every single function, everything across the entire environment, we're going to need, way too much staff and way too much time, which we don't have.
Yeah, when we hear that all the time on this show about how, your first point that you made about the decentralized control, right? The idea that one group or one person at the top is going to make the approve, disapprove on each call is just a fallacy. It is actually counterintuitive to time. But we know of legacy companies that are, maybe they're moving a little slower. They tend to, there's usually a control element. That seems to be the common thing. Like someone somewhere wants the control to be like, no, or wants it delegated so that, if I'm the CEO and I delegate to my CISO, I'm like, hey, everything is your fault. If something happens on your watch, I'm talking to you. I need you to approve everything. The decentralized world versus the centralized control point. Why has that had such a hard time, do you think, to evolve into this decentralized world? Because there are certainly companies that are still thinking that way. Like, hey, one person's got to be in charge. Why do you think it's so hard to evolve for these leaders?
I think so. One person can be in charge from, so I view my role as I'm here to help the organization make better decisions around security, right? So, enable them to allow them to make informed decisions. But that doesn't mean that I own every single aspect of it. I want to make sure that the teams are empowered so that they can move quickly too. But I've been part of those organizations that are definitely, everything's in one team, and, the CISO or the security leader and myself at one point have been the one more or less accountable for all the risks, which is also another fallacy, right? I mean, they're not our risks. These are, business risks. Yeah. And I think it's the other side of how it needs to be approached, right? We need to make sure that we're presenting these things, getting the business stakeholders involved, making sure that they know that they own the risk. Hey, this is your risk, not my risk, right? I'm here to help you make a better decision. But at the end of the day, if something goes wrong, who's going to be, basically who's going to be responding to this? Who's going to have to, be in front of the news media talking about why this happened? Maybe in some organizations it is, the CISO, but, should it be? They're not the owner of the business, because, if you put it in my hands, just thinking about it from strictly a security standpoint, I would just stop those types of activities, but that obviously wouldn't, that wouldn't work, because you're going to cripple the business, which is not what I'm not trying to do.
No, I love that. I love that. And for yourself, have you always been interested in security throughout your technical career, or is this something that kind of you evolved into? Give us an idea of how you became interested in this subject matter.
I think I got into security in the late 90s. I started doing tech, pretty much 94, 95 timeframe. And, I started a desktop, and I really liked tech. But I couldn't figure out what part of it I liked, right? I did systems engineering. I did networks. I did, way back in the day, Novell networks, Microsoft, all that kind of stuff. And then I found that security really gave me the opportunity to touch everything, right? I got involved with firewalls and with all kinds of new things that I, didn't have any experience on. And I love to learn. So that's how I started, right? I think I administered my first firewall in 1998. From there, really security was kind of an offshoot of network security. So I was in the network team doing routers and all that. And I basically became, kind of the network security guy. And then from there, I just loved that there was so much in security that I could learn, and so many new approaches to things. And, I am an engineer architect by nature, so I love to see how things are built. But, I also figured out how to break them down by being in security. And it was kind of the best of both worlds. I could learn how to build something and learn how to break it. That's why I taught myself how to code too, because then, I learned how to code, and then I learned how to actually, break the code, and I learned how to use the code to actually, do interesting things on top of that as well.
Yeah. When did you transform? About what year did you transform? Because a lot of times network security, well, it's just in my experience, right? People that are familiar very much with network security, they don't necessarily know how to develop applications. And here you are on the application security side.
Yeah, I think so. I spent a lot of time in pretty much every area of security. So I did, governance work. I did SOX auditing for a while. Um, you know, took part in pretty much every aspect of security. And I think it was 2015 when I was already actually in the leadership role that I really had an interest in getting more into the AppSec side. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons I really liked the AppSec side of it was because, we were a product. We were a tech company delivering a product. So our engineers were actually delivering, the product for the company. So it's like a perfect opportunity to really, influence our revenue lines. There was also a lot of interesting innovation that was actually coming out of that space, because a lot of the stuff from managing kind of, or securing the typical business units and more of the legacy stuff, it weren't really forward thinking. It was just, get it done and move on. Right. But from an engineering standpoint, it's like, okay, we can't interrupt the workflows. We got to enable them to move faster, but also have security. And it was just a really fun challenge. And we did a lot of interesting things around that too, on actually, allowing the teams to move faster without security being a roadblock.
So one of the things that we see from, and we understand based on what you just said, plus Postman's brand promise. So we saw some information on Postman that there's like 15 million developers currently developing on the Postman platform. And you just mentioned before how you enjoyed tinkering, how you liked building. Of course, that pulled you into the application security side of things. So talk to us about like how fast do you feel like your knowledge base is growing now that you're a Postman? Because like like the amount of requests and features and things needed that you are getting hit with today. I mean, I don't know how many more greater. It used to be the CISO at realtor.com. Like, it's okay to say that. You're on LinkedIn saying that. Like, the requests that you get now have to be like, it has to dwarf whatever you got.
Realtor.
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking.
It's a different game. And Realtor had a lot of traffic, and we actually had a lot of visitors on a monthly basis, right? Here, the numbers are just staggering. It is at a different level. I'm also in a different role because I'm actually vendor. I'm now a vendor, right? Whereas at Realtor, everybody's a vendor to some extent, but we were really more consumer driven, right? We were delivering a consumer product. Whereas here, there's a whole different set of, challenges and opportunities and, things that we got to be focusing on, right?
So, literally Realtor could be one of your 15 million customers.
Yeah, actually, I actually think they are. Or I know that they're using it. That much I know.
Yeah. So what give us is what, I'm just thinking to myself, you're a CISO at Realtor. I mean, that's an awesome role. Now you're at Postman. They're like, give us like your first impressions on that first day, because like I said, the amount of people you now answer to just went through. It's bonkers how many people you answered to.
So the first, it's funny because I had actually used Postman back in like 2014, 2015, when basically the Chrome extension. Right. Because I was always a tinkerer and hacker and all that, so I was doing that kind of stuff. And then, when I actually got approached about the opportunity at Postman, I didn't realize, how much Postman actually did, and the kind of the how big the platform was. I still thought of it as kind of the API client that I was using way back in the day. So, I had the discussion with, the co-founders and, talked about the role. And then, once I accepted, when I joined, I'm like, all right, this is, that's cool. They got this enterprise product. I, knew enough from the website and the conversations. But then when I actually saw how much there was to it and how big it was, I was like, oh, wow, this is way larger than what I expected. A lot more complex. But, one of the things I really like, though, too, is, there's a lot of really, really, really smart people within Postman. And I was really impressed with kind of just the designs that we have, the architectures, the way it's all laid out. Nothing's perfect. There's always, room for improvement and all that. But I was, for a company of this size and 5 years old, I was amazed by how much content we had, how many visitors we had, how much, rapid growth we had. It was great. So it was definitely not what I was used to. Also, one of the things I loved about it is, when I was in my previous role, we were a consumer-driven company where security really wasn't as top of mind as it would be in a vendor landscape, in this type of environment. And, when I come here, it's completely opposite, right? Security is, extremely important at all levels. And it was already well ingrained in kind of, the system. So it's now, how do we actually take it to the next level? How do we, design security for scale? And that's kind of the exciting part, is coming into something that, was already a phenomenal program that somebody had, established before, but now taking it to that next level. And that's the part that really excited me about, having a great team that, already put in a lot of work, having a great culture. It was exciting.
Yeah. Give us an idea of like the type of skill level you're looking for, like to work at Postman, right? So if you got the security division, right? Give us an idea of what you're looking like. Who's the next wave of person that is going to take Postman to the next level? What kind of skills do they need to possess? Because you're in a place where we already said the requirements and demands on the Postman business, right? You are a developing API platform for developers. So they're going to push the envelope as to what is possible, what is, and what can be done, whether it's through compute, physical store, like it doesn't matter. Like they're going to push you to the limit, right? So what does that mean for security? And what does that mean? Like, what do you think what are you looking for in talent, like to help you and your team meet your goals? What does that person look like? What kind of skills do they need?
Yeah, it's probably multiple skills. We're looking for quite a few different types of individuals. So some that are very well versed in kind of modern compute stacks and modern, cloud focused companies, cloud native companies. We're looking really to, automate a lot of kind of the traditional, security functions. So security operations and monitoring, detection, response. How do we actually put a developer, how do we actually build tool sets and practices that actually enable our teams to move faster, right? So, writing our own monitoring and detection engineering, things like that, right? So we're looking for those types of skill sets that are really well versed in, building and creating workflows and automation. We're also looking at, as we want to make sure that we instill trust from a customer standpoint. So, that includes, getting compliant with, various types of doing our SOC 2, ISO compliance, various other initiatives like that. So understanding kind of the requirements and, the governance aspects of it. So we're looking for folks who really understand kind of the, the nature of that. And, with that being said, as you're doing compliance, we want to make sure that we're doing it, intelligently and not actually adding extra burden that's unnecessary. So how do we do some automation with that space as well? So, a lot of automation, a lot of opportunity for, really solving the problem from a different perspective in a different way. I think I alluded to it earlier. From a security standpoint, the way we've been doing it for the past 20, 25 years, it hasn't really worked that well, right? So it's, we really need to kind of approach the problem differently. We need to look at it from a different lens and say, okay, what, how can we leverage technology? It's a tool, right? But it's, let's use it to make our lives easier, to make the security lives easier. How do we automate certain tasks that are difficult to do? I think there's going to be a lot of that coming.
No question about it. It's always scary. I feel like in security is because it's like you've just begun, because you're always you're reacting to someone else, right? It's like, everything that you've done in the past theoretically could be a non-problem in the future, because bad actors are always going to try to find new ways to get information. We've seen like identity,
we've had old ways as well.
So they'll keep testing the old way.
Things that you thought were solved will then become an issue later on, right?
That
as well.
Challenging space to be in.
But it's Josh, fun. I love this space. I love security. It's my passion. If it wasn't my job, it'd be my hobby. I love this stuff. So,
well, Josh, it is now time to do the lightning round. The lightning round is brought to you by the Salesforce platform, the #1 platform for digital transformation of every experience. Josh, this is where we ask you questions outside of the world of work. I know you just said you would do security if you, even if you didn't have this job, but we're going to want to know a little bit more about you outside the world of security. You ready?
All right, ready.
All right. So we checked you out on Twitter. You have an interesting avatar. What is the story behind your avatar? For those who don't know, Josh's avatar currently, it's you've got some kind of filter on your face with a big old beard.
Oh, actually, it was just a Snapchat filter I was doing with my son. I like the way that the beard came out, and so I'm like, all right, I'm going to use that.
Simple enough. Yeah, it says on your Twitter profile, you're a proud dad. Sounds like you have a son. What's the most fun thing you get to do as a dad?
We go to Magic Mountain all the time. So we have season passes there, and he loves it. He's about to turn 8. It's so much fun.
Have you put
I
him
get to ride rides?
Yeah, I was going to ask. Have you put him on the X roller coaster?
He wants to ride everything. He's 52 inches now, so he can pretty much go on all. He's got me to ride rides that I wouldn't ride normally. So
So I don't know exactly how old you are, but I will tell you my experiences from being a dad is I found out the hard way that I'm much more susceptible to motion sickness as an older person now than I was when I was a kid. You're nodding your head. Has this happened to you?
Oh yeah. I can't spin. I get car sick now, which I didn't get that when I was younger. And he wants to go on the rides that spin a lot. So there's one that actually is, this pendulum ride that, I think it's called Crazanity. He loves it. And I go on it with him. And afterwards, I always feel a little bit, off. He's like, let's go on it again. I'm like, okay, give me an hour, then we'll do it again.
I know exactly how that feeling, man. It's just weird. You go from being a young guy that can handle anything to like, oh man, I can't move like that.
Yeah. First time I got car sick as a passenger, I'm like, what the hell? This is terrible.
Now, you said, you enjoy spending time with your kid. We saw the guitar in the background. It sounds like you used to play music. Is that accurate?
I mean, I used to tinker with music, just like, I tinker with a lot of things. So I've got guitars. I've got a keyboard in the other room. Sometimes I play them, but, nothing good.
Hey, you don't have to be good at something to enjoy it.
Exactly.
Well, Josh, it was awesome having you today on IT Visionaries. Thanks for sharing a little about your hobbies and your life outside of work. I agree with you. Your job is just beginning, the wave of the future. Who knows what it looks like? I'm glad we have people like you in charge of it. Postman, for those of you guys who don't know, again, it is the tool and platform for companies to actually build APIs or help build APIs. 15 million strong and probably some more feature requests in your queue right now. Right now, Josh, people.
Thanks so much for having me on. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining us on IT Visionaries.